Good morning, and all protocols observed. Welcome again to those who have traveled from outside of South Africa, and welcome to those who are joining us virtually on Zoom. Please bear with us with some logistical issues here, but yeah, we're good to start. We are rolling. We'll make up for time. It's a very thin program, so we'll be able to make up for time. Yeah, I'm Tendai Murisa. I'm an associate also with the center based in Zimbabwe. I think that's enough. Then to introduce our keynote speaker, I was joking with our keynote speaker in the morning saying, this is my first time coming across a professor who is engaged in Africa, engaged in the study of the United States. You know, there are many PhD theses that have come out of the United States based on the study of Africans. Yeah, so now it's good to see that there's a center at Wits University that is dedicated towards understanding the United States. I think that is very important, and it's also an opportune moment for us because Professor Gilbert Khadiagala is this Jan Smart's Professor of International Relations and also the Director for the study of the Center for the Study of the United States, as I've already said. And I think it's good for us because we are getting an outside of the room experience coming from an understanding, a framing of around international relations. And philanthropy is it's a huge part of international relations globally, either as official development aid or as private foundations. It has always been part of the diplomatic agenda and also just how nations develop relations with each other. So Professor Khadiagala is going to give us the keynote presentation. I would urge, because we are trying to just combine, I would urge colleagues, if they can, there are two kinds of questions that you're going to ask. There are questions to do with clarification of issues raised. So I'll take the clarification questions after Professor has spoken. Then other substantive contributions and questions, they'll come after the panel. So Professor Khadiagala will be with us, we'll go through all the panelists, then we can raise those questions. So without further ado, Prof, it's up over to you. Please lead us. You can take the podium, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Tendai, and Becky before him for the kind invitation really this morning to speak to a philanthropy audience. As I said, my name is Gilbert Khadiagala at Wits University. We had this center that I started in 2018. So it's part of a larger philanthropic enterprise because we have to look for money. I'm saying that from the outset because I want to admit that this is not going to be a really conventional keynote address. And the reason is very simple, that as Tendai was saying from the beginning, that I'm actually outside the field of philanthropy, apart from just my affiliation, as I mentioned, somebody who runs a center within a university, and it has to go into the business of looking for money. But I was nonetheless, in fact, very privileged to have been invited to be a discussant. Although I want to describe myself actually as a super super discussant to this panel that is going to come after my presentation. Not the conventional keynote address. As a student of international relations, the invitation was intriguing because I'm an outsider. But I think it also gave me a very good opportunity to begin digging quickly into what the field is all about. Philanthropy as an academic field. I think since Becky and his colleagues established the center, I've always wanted to come and speak to him about what is this field all about. But I haven't had that chance, so it's a very good opportunity then also to reintroduce myself to the group of philanthropists who are studying it. But it was also an interesting invitation because what it did do to me was to force me to do some reading. And so my brief remarks are going really to speak to what I've just gathered within the last few days of having to think through what is it that I can say at a conference of this nature. But it was also easy because I was asked to speak broadly to the themes that are going to come up this morning in the papers that are going to be presented. So what I did is I went to the library and ran into a very intriguing essay by a professor at Princeton University, Professor Stephen Katz, who has an essay in 1999, and it has also a very interesting title, which says, "Where did the serious study of philanthropy come from actually?" Where did this field come from? And I got a few things from that essay that I want to share. I think probably you as students of philanthropy have already read it as a matter of course. But I think it was enlightening to me because what it did tell me was Professor Katz and his colleagues in the mid-70s were grappling to understand what philanthropy was. And they started from a very modest base after an invitation from, I think, the Ford Foundation to study the history of foundations. Professor Katz is a legal historian, and one of his friends is also a historian. So they are given that task to probe the history of foundations. But I think when they went to the library, you can imagine this is about 1975, there wasn't much in terms of the history of foundations. So they decided that that was a very critical opportunity to begin to build the field that comes to be the field that we know today as philanthropy as an academic subject. So starting modestly as the study of foundations, it became philanthropy and public policy in the 80s. As the field is now growing, philanthropy and public policy, because they saw a very clear link between philanthropy and public policy. In fact, philanthropy is about public policy. I think that's why we are here, and that's why the subject is important. Into the 90s, up to today, It is a field we associate as a field of third sector research. So the journey has been fairly short from the mid-70s into currently where the third sector research with robust, very vibrant research out there trying to probe a subject that has achieved the kind of diversity that it has within a very short time. I think the most interesting story about the field, therefore, is Becky has already alluded to it, the multidisciplinarity and the interdisciplinarity of the subject. Grouping sociologists, economists, the whole rubric of humanities and social sciences together. And that is a huge umbrella, a very huge umbrella, which gives us, therefore, gives the field more breathing space. There are more people there, there are more scholars, and they are grappling with the area of what does it mean to give? What does it mean to do good? And how can we do it better? So they are held by the very common foundation of science of giving and the science of doing good. Whether they be anthropology, sociology, international relations, although the field now is getting increasingly dominated by economists. But I think it's still very safe because the other disciplines are grappling around it and they are trying to find space around the real field of anthropology. So that's, I think, a very interesting component about your discipline that I found interesting. I think that diversity enriches the field and therefore makes it what it is. So that's the first thing I got from his essay. The other lesson I got was what I want to describe as the dual heritage of philanthropy, or the dual legacies of the field. What does that mean? From day one, Professor Katz is saying, you've had a contestation, a competition between the thinkers within that field and the doers, the people on the ground. And that contestation is very natural because what is happening is that if you group all these disciplines together, you run the risk, therefore, of having a kind of Tower of Babel phenomenon. You have too many voices sitting around a huge discipline that, according to him, doesn't really have a core concept, a conceptual core. And therefore, you have very many voices. You have many scholars that are coalescing around a field. And that inevitably produces a kind of competition that he's talking about, a kind of contestation within the field. So if you read that essay, you'll see saying from the beginning, he said there was competition between the doers and the thinkers. The competition that has never really gone away. Particularly from the American part of that debate. American is more, I think, the theorists and the doers in the US are more vicious about how they compete than I would imagine in Africa, where the field is still fairly new, or where the field probably has been sensitized to those kinds of competitions, and therefore it is probably able to manage those competitions better than where these debates began. So I thought that was quite an interesting point that comes out of the field of anthropology, philanthropy from the outset has been beset by those two competitors. And he argues that in fact that competition has retarded, the word he uses is retarded the maturity of the discipline. I think we need, and I think Alan is going to speak to that because I think I read his abstract, which speaks directly what he calls academia, and I think he's going to help us therefore try to understand how to reconcile the doers and the thinkers, and therefore rebut the thesis that is coming out of Professor Katz's essay, that the field needs to do better in resolving those conflicts between the thinkers and the doers. And there is nothing wrong with thinkers or doers, but I think we just have to be, alert to the fact that where the field emerged from, that was the first contestation. So I like the fact, therefore, that Alan is with us, has done a lot of work in that area, and he's actually contributing within African philanthropic studies on that bigger issue. What is the tension between the doers and the thinkers, and how can we get them to speak to each other more politely? I think that's the point. The other theme I think that is emerging from the conference, and I think is going to have very interesting papers presented the entire day, but I think is the theme that is going to come out of the paper by Jonathan. I don't know, Jonathan is not here, probably is online, but it's a very interesting theme, that the theme of giving as community creation. I think when he talks about communities in Malawi, he's going to speak to us about that if he's around. Giving as creation of community. Giving as the coalescence of social relationships. And I think that's the bigger essence of the field, where we hold constant the fact that we are united, or the field is united by the notion of how do you create better relations around the giving. And that also speaks to the literature that I read on what are the cultural foundations of philanthropy within the African context. And I think that's a big area of research, not just on the issues around Ubuntu and all these other nice notions about community building in our continent, but I think it anchors us into, as Africans really, it anchors us into the field, even before the field becomes a field of study. That in fact, philanthropy is about our living, our belongingness. And I thought that's quite an interesting element that philanthropy as a field is going to expose us to, and we need more research at the social foundations of doing good and giving and so on. So his paper focuses on communities and how they give. On the other hand, we have Jacob here sitting and going to tell us the exact opposite picture. Because I think what Jonathan is saying, as he looks at the notion of communities, philanthropy as giving, as community building, is to say probably those big organizations are elite-based. And how do we actually make sense of these other subterranean actors within the larger field? They're elite-based, they're too far removed from their constituencies, so they are probably not good community builders. Jacob is going to tell us about their high net worth, and those are the people I think Jonathan is contesting. I mean, conceptually. Well, we want to know in the case of the East Africa, the high net individuals in East Africa, where are they? Who are they? But more important, I think, the notion of where are they hiding? Because we want to see them more as they build a good society within us or within our community. Well, it's again, I didn't read Jacob's abstract, but I think it comes out as a very good contrast from the paper by Jonathan, if it will be presented. Finally, I think the theme that the conference is organized around, or rather the theme for this morning's session is philanthropy in times of crisis, in times of turmoil. Fortunately, this is not really new. I mean, we've been living with this crisis, or we've been living with a huge global crisis for the last 2 years. And we're still living with the COVID crisis until this moment. So we are very happy that Gail is going to speak to us really about, again, the subterranean, the localized means of managing this crisis through the lens of philanthropy. And I think she is going to ask big questions. Who comes to the table in times of this crisis, particularly at the localized level? How do communities coalesce? Do they get back to each other? How do they return to humanity when they are confronted by huge crisis? The volatile times, I think that's the accurate description of our session. But we're also going to learn that if crises, in fact, increase fragility, what is the role of philanthropic organizations in ameliorating this fragility? Again, it's a question of going back to our earlier theme about community and society and reorganizing ourselves as individuals when we come into this big crisis. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, briefly, what I've been trying to do is to simply highlight, I think, some of the themes that I thought would be important for the entire conference, but particularly for the sessions today. Unfortunately, also, this is not news. These are things that you've been grappling with as you study this very interesting area. And I think we are going to learn more from the real presentation than my modest remarks on the state of the field. And I think on that note, I want to say that I wish everybody a very successful presentation, and hopefully we can have a vibrant day and we can debate and wrestle. Do it politely. And thank you very much.
I like the doing it politely part. So we wrestle with ideas, but we don't want to see fights in the tea room and space. Yeah. Thank you so much, Prof. I think what you just gave us is what I'll call an advanced introduction, reintroduction to philanthropy, especially its historical origins and the challenges that were faced. The tensions are real. The tensions that you raise are real around, is philanthropy just by high net worth individuals, or is it what communities do? Last week at an event, one of the leading practitioners in the space challenged all of us, but I think it was mostly directed at the director of the center, that should we still be talking about philanthropy in Africa, or we should consider it as sharing? You know, so an introduction again of another concept in how we're framing it. And I'm glad that you raised this issue, that we're at a place whereby it's at its nascent stage in terms of like what Prof. Beke was saying and what you're also saying, that we're at a very early stage. And the early stage, if we get it right at the very early stages, then we'll know how broad the area that we have to study. And we'll also know the boundaries. Because for some, the challenge is philanthropy has become everything to everyone. There are no boundaries now. There are no academic boundaries or even theoretical boundaries. I think it's very important, the issues that you raise, and we're going to be grappling with them, not only in this academic conference, but also the annual philanthropy conference that starts tomorrow. And I think the challenge with an academic conference such as this is that colleagues are all worried about their papers that they're about to present. So half the time they are looking at their own presentations, but I would encourage you to really listen. I think what the Keynote has done and the presentations that are coming are very important for framing not only the day, but framing how we study the field that we're in.